Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Abergan. This day, September 24th, 1810, the fort at Baton Rouge is under the control of a group of armed settlers. The day before, the fort, which was under the control of the Spanish, had been attacked by a group led by a man named Philemon Thomas. A few days later, after this attack, after capturing some other forts in the area, the group declared themselves independent. Spanish flags came down, flags with a white star on a field of blue were raised, and the Republic of West Florida was born. It would die 47 days later, but still, it was a breakaway republic right there on the Gulf Coast at a very interesting moment in American history. So, here to discuss, as always, is Nicole Hemmer of Columbia. Hello, Nikki.
Hey, Jody.
And our special guest for this episode and next episode as well, Kristen Soltis Anderson, pollster at Echelon Insights, author of The Selfie Vote. Thank you, Kristen, for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
And you are, we should just get this out of the way, you are a native of Florida, and do you want to go ahead and point out that this technically did not happen in the Florida that we know today?
Well, when I got your note saying, hey, we're going to do this episode about the Republic of West Florida, I was like, how have I never learned about this? Because when you grow up in Florida, you do learn a little bit about Florida history. I am a Florida woman. You take your trip to St. Augustine, which is where Ponce de Leon showed up and set up the very first, I believe it's the first city in the United States was St. Augustine. The only time I've ever had a political appointment, I was 18 years old and I was appointed to the committee that picked, you know how every state has a quarter?
Mm-hmm.
And so Florida's quarter has like one of Ponce de Leon's ships arriving in St. Augustine and a space shuttle taking off because it was 2 types of discovery. And so I was like, how have I never heard of this? I know a little about Florida history, but this is technically taking place, I believe it's Louisiana. Is that right?
Yeah, so if people know the sort of Gulf region, it's Baton Rouge, right, is where the fort is, and then it's sort of the area that goes a little towards the east over there, but still Louisiana. And then, if you know there's actually a little notch of Alabama and Mississippi, and then you get to actual Florida. But, I think the whole region was kind of called Florida at that point because it was under Spanish control. But yeah, I don't think, Nikki, had you heard of this before?
No, this is one of those things. Well, first of all, it was pretty short-lived.
Yes.
We're not talking about the Republic of Texas, which has become so central to the pride and identity of Texans today. The Republic of West Florida it doesn't seem to have that many boosters who are getting the word out.
But they had a flag. They made a flag right away, and they raised it
with one lone
star on it. Yeah, but 47 days. So one thing, Nikki, I kind of want to point out here is this man that I mentioned, and as we continue to talk about the wonderful names of the past, Philemon, is that his name? Yeah.
Feel like it's one we have to bring back, right?
Yeah, exactly. It needs to come back. Check the baby name wizard and see if Philemon comes back. But Philemon Thomas was an ex-Revolutionary War soldier. Is there something there that, we have these people who just fought this Revolutionary War and now they're out there, freelancing, just kind of trying to start other revolutions?
A little bit. We saw the people who fought in the Revolutionary War freelance in a lot of other revolutions, whether it was in France or in various places here in the U.S. We've, of course, talked about Aaron Burr trying to start a little republic of his own. So, there's a revolutionary spirit in the air. And also, the U.S. isn't totally secure as an independent country yet, right? It has only been a country for a few decades. They're about to enter into this big war with Britain, which comes to be called the Second War of Independence because it finally boots out the other empires from America's neighborhood. But, it's one of those periods where it still kind of feels like anything could happen.
What struck me the most about one of the things kind of fueling this as I was reading about it is that it seems as though part of why the Republic of West Florida tried to spring into being was that there was no real clarity on who was actually in control of it anyways. The U.S. believed that it had been part of the Louisiana Purchase, that it's effectively like they bought a house, and when they went and moved into the house, the next door neighbors were like, no, your back patio is actually part of my house. You don't, that's not your patio. That's my patio. And that was sort of the clash between, I forget if it was the British or the Spanish who controlled it at that point, but the French sold it, and it was not entirely clear that it was the French property to sell.
Yeah, they needed a title lock on that just so they could trace exactly
Get title insurance, guys. Get title insurance. That's what it's for.
That's right. Well, I think that the Spanish were involved because one of the other sort of through line stories here, which really connects with the American Revolution, is that they were being mismanaged in a lot of ways. Like they were responsive to overlords from overseas who didn't have their best interests at heart. They thought that they would be better off economically, socially, politically if they just went it alone. And there was enough benign neglect by empires in the region that they could kind of get away with that. Right. There were other wars being fought across the sea that had those empires distracted.
And wasn't this also around the time that Spain and Britain basically swapped Florida for Cuba? Florida being defined very broadly. Like I believe that it happened at some point in time after the American Revolution when the Brits were trying to figure out, what do we actually want to be doing here on the other side of this ocean?
Yeah, and it takes a while to get all of that sorted out, of course. It's not until the late 19th, early 20th century that Cuban independence comes about, that Spain finally wraps up its empire. But yes, they're still doing a lot of swapping in the hemisphere during this period.
So I'm intrigued a little bit by President Madison's response here, Niki, because, the Louisiana Purchase had happened under Jefferson, and then Madison is there now with this sort of, I can't tell whether he really wants to continue to expand the United States and how aggressive he wants to be, and his treatment of this insurgent republic seems to sort of show a little bit of hesitation about, I don't really know what to do about kind of these new parts of this country that I just became the leader of.
Yeah, I mean, we should say that, Jefferson had this big act as president, the Louisiana Purchase, which he technically didn't have any authority to do. So I think at least part of it was Madison being like, I don't think we can do that. Right. So there was a little bit of just kind of sitting and watching and waiting that ends up working out really well because the Republic of West Florida frees itself. So the U.S. doesn't have to get involved in a war. The U.S. doesn't have to pay any more money for it. They just sort of absorb it, about a month and a half after it's founded.
This is my favorite strategy to employ when I'm playing Civilization. You wait until the neighboring civilization has caused a lot of unhappiness and strife in your next door neighbor, and then you just kind of waltz in and invite them to be a part of your empire, and that's always a great strategy.
Yeah, and it is kind of remarkable, and I don't know if it was necessarily how concerted of a strategy it was, but by just kind of laying back, what ends up happening is there's this little skirmish between these insurgent forces and the Spanish, and then after a 6 weeks or so, the U.S. is able to come in and kind of broker a deal and basically say, we think it makes the most sense for these to come into our hands. And it was, I think I read this correctly, but it was the first time that the U.S. had acquired a good chunk of territory from another sovereignty without war and without compensation. They basically just ended up inheriting this land, and so used the insurgent forces almost as a kind of what do they call it? A pass between entity. What do you call when you're laundering money? A pass through, like a LLC or something. Yeah, but it's basically what they ended up doing in order to acquire this.
So it's like laundered territory.
It's like laundered territory. Yes, that's exactly right. I don't know if we want to talk a little bit, and I don't know, Kristen, if you have things to say about that sort of region. I mean, I've always felt like that Gulf region, especially, and I know this wasn't technically in Florida, but I think the Florida Panhandle is the most interesting part of this country. But I just think it's kind of a place where you can still see these really interesting clashes and combinations of different forces.
Well, one thing that's so interesting about growing up in Florida is, now that I've moved away and I live in DC, people sort of will joke about, Florida man and Florida woman. That's why I think I have it in my Twitter bio that I'm Florida woman. But it is so hard to actually define Florida in any singular way beyond, humidity and mosquitoes. But like North Florida is almost a different country than South Florida. I grew up in Central Florida, and I don't believe I have much of an accent of any kind because it's essentially, neutral American suburbs where people come from all over. And we have Disney World. But the Panhandle really is very, very, very Southern in a way that the rest of the state kind of, once you hit the Orlando, Tampa area further south, just isn't the same.
Yeah, there's this line about Florida that the further north you go, the further south you get. And I think that's very much true. I lived in Miami for a while, and it was very different.
Yeah, it was not until I went to college in Gainesville that I encountered SEC football tailgating culture and, the food and it's just a whole different world than what I had experienced in suburban Orlando. So Florida contains multitudes. I will always defend my home state.
And I've been to St. Augustine and parts of Pensacola and some of those towns. And, I think in this country, we don't have a ton of places that really show their history. And that's a region where you can, as you were saying, you're like, oh, these were some of the first cities in this country. And you can see the Spanish settlements. And I mean, it's just kind of like right there. It's sort of still living in a way that I really appreciate. I want to talk about legacy here, and I'm going to mention one specific legacy, and then I want to ask a question about a sort of larger legacy. One interesting legacy is that in Louisiana, there are still parishes known as Florida parishes. And those are the parishes that sort of run, if you can picture it in your mind, sort of from Baton Rouge along the top of Lake Pontchartrain. So New Orleans is on the south of Lake Pontchartrain, across the top and over to the Mississippi border. And those are known as Florida parishes. And so the sort of name is still there and the legacy is still there. And the sort of idea that these were generally the parts of Louisiana that kind of tilted towards Spain and not France is still there. And, a reminder that certainly in that part of the country, these deep roots and these deep allegiances still hold. So I found that really fascinating. And so the Republic of West Florida lives on in that way. Maybe someday it'll make it onto a coin. We'll see. But I guess my bigger question is, we do live in a moment when this republic feels tenuous. And so, Kristen, I wonder if there's anything in this story that feels like it connects to now and the notion that fractured parts of America might start to actually break apart.
I think the thing that stuck out to me that was the most relevant to our political moment was when reading about Madison, with the same questions about was Jefferson allowed to do this with the Louisiana Purchase, also kind of wondering, what am I allowed to do? And I think it was that Congress was out of session, wasn't going to be coming back for quite a while. And so the president goes, well, Congress isn't around and there's a crisis here. So I'm just going to do some things. And that is there's a long tradition of that now of crisis moments equals, oh, Congress isn't acting. Well, I guess I'm going to do something from the executive. There are very strong echoes of it today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I do think that there are a lot of small secession movements across the United States that look to things like the Republic of Texas, the Vermont Republic. Hawaii was once independent itself. It looks to these independent territories, a lot of which became states, and say, okay, so secession is something that we can do we can have the state of Jefferson, I think they've called it. And all of these kinds of secessionist movements talk about these former republics and talk about sort of dreaming of reversing the process, which seems, I have to say, pretty unlikely.
Pretty unlikely. But certainly I think a force in our politics that needs to be acknowledged. I mean, I think that there's a lot of strains of this in some white nationalist movements. There's some plans to break off the eastern part of Oregon, right, and turn it into its own sort of breakaway republic. So I mean, it's always tough to kind of figure out when is this just fan fiction and when is this something that actually tells us something about the sort of deep strains in our country at the moment. So, we'll see. But yeah, I don't think anywhere in the at least contiguous United States feels like just like open territory enough that it could actually get pulled off in this way.
Yeah, I think those political boundaries are pretty firmly set, and it would require more than just a peaceful political agreement to separate for any secessionist movement to get anywhere.
All right, final question. If you had a breakaway republic and you had to design a flag, I know that both of you would do better than a white star on a blue background, but where would you start here, Kristen?
Ooh, that's a good question. My favorite color is red, although I worry that would send off some, communist overtones. And so maybe I should be looking more to like a soft Tory blue or something like that for my for my main color. And I got to think, for me, I'm a Florida Gator, so maybe that would be the like animal. And that I love the California state flag with the bear on it. It looks so cool. So maybe one with a gator on it. Maybe that's where I would begin.
You're like, my background is really more in coin design than flag design, but sure, let's do this.
Numismatics, yes.
Yeah, I mean, California itself was once an independent republic, and it managed to get a bear on its flag, which seems pretty cool. I think we don't have enough animals on flags in general. So I'd start with some kind of animal. Bears already taken, eagles are kind of already done. Maybe we go mythical creature, maybe a narwhal for like an Alaska republic. That's what I'm going to go for.
Great. Yeah. Narwhals are big in my household these days. There's a book I read my daughter about narwhals in it. All right, we're going to leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thank you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kristen Soltis Anderson, thanks to you. This was very fun, and you'll be back for one more episode after this.
You got it.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX. Our researcher is Jacob Feldman, and Jacob is our producer along with Brittany Brown. Follow us on social media where we're posting tons of stuff on Twitter and Instagram every day at ThisDayPod. Thanks to everyone who's been leaving comments and reviews and getting in touch. A couple of you have actually flagged this Republic of West Florida for us, so thank you for that. Keep emailing us thisdaypod@gmail.com. My name is Jody Abergan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Radiotopia from PRX.